Advanced air mobility is emerging as a potentially transformative mode of transport. Electric vehicle takeoff and landing aircraft, or eVTOLs, are capturing public imagination. If pilot projects prove viable, we stand at the beginning of a revolution in how people move within and between cities. Welcome to the Future Energy Insights, the podcast series that explores the future of sustainable innovation, brought to you by the World Future Energy Summit. This episode examines the evolution of technologies, regulatory frameworks, and the infrastructure that will determine eVTOL rollout. We'll discuss how eVTOLs can integrate with existing transport networks, the infrastructure required, and the urban planning choices that will shape where and how they fly. So, will eVTOLs be an urban mobility revolution that transforms city travel? Or a set of expensive, high-profile pilot projects that ultimately fail to take off? I'm Rob Jones, partner at B2B Connect, and joining me are Gary Newman, aviation consultant with the Abu Dhabi Department of Municipalities and Transport, and Daniel O'Neill, general manager for the Middle East at Skyports. So, Gary, let's start with the trials, because I do think that eVTOLs, as I've said in my introduction, they're capturing public imagination, and they do have that opportunity to truly transform transport, or certainly urban transport. So tell us a little bit about what trials are planned and where they're up to.
eVTOLs are going to absolutely change the way cities work. And eVTOLs, right from the beginning, we've taken into the cases that it's not only just passengers, it's cargo as well. And the logistics side of eVTOL technology is going to be phenomenal. With this trials, we've decided, we had a workshop in 2 months ago in Abu Dhabi, where we got all the stakeholders from industry into a room, and we identified a whole lot of KPIs. And one of the chief KPIs was create sandboxes where trials can happen. We had already started in along that path by identifying as Al Ain Airport as a key node, where a lot of the development of the, shall we call it, the air taxi type eVTOLs would occur. There's very good facilities there. The Etihad Airways training facilities there, hangars, everything is there. It's a lovely area outside. It's very easy to access. And so we created a sandbox around Al Ain where the air taxi trials will be happening. Further, we've gone on, and because as we see AAM, or Advanced Air Mobility, we see it as a holistic type system. It is not only piloted vehicles, which most of your air taxis are at present, although in the future they will migrate into autonomous type operations without pilots, as well as the cargo and cargo drones. You can have piloted cargo vehicles as well as cargo drones. There's a very good project on the go in Abu Dhabi at the moment with a company called LODD, L-O-D-D, where they've just created a hybrid eVTOL cargo drone which will operate autonomously, which is a fantastic technology and a fantastic vehicle. It's due to fly in a very short while, again in our sandbox in Al Ain. However, what we're doing as well is we created a whole lot of different sandboxes. And the idea is that manufacturers can come and validate their data and collect more data as part of their certification programs to get these vehicles certified for operation. And we've created some in rural areas, semi-rural, urban areas where we look at autonomous type operations, so we have a little bit more protection around the vehicles and that, and a whole showcase of these. And what it does is it allows these operators to not only validate their data, it allows them to showcase their data to potential clients. They can say, come see, this is how it works, this is how we do it, this is why it's like this is why it's like that. And then all of a sudden, something that's a concept becomes a reality.
So when can we see, do you think, the first passengers stepping into an eVTOL to be transported from place A to place B?
Realistically, first quarter 26 is the target.
Very soon.
It's very soon. However, that is very dependent on certification of the vehicle. We already have a number of facilities in Abu Dhabi which has been or in the process of being certified as hybrid type vertiports. So in other words, they can take helicopters as well as eVTOLs, and so that facility will be available. And as soon as the certification program on the vehicles progresses to that extent, then you will actually start to see these vehicles flying firstly in Al Ain. We were very keen to do a bit of hot weather trials in Al Ain particularly. However, the certification processes didn't quite work out that way. And as soon as we then satisfied that the vehicle's performance and safety protocols are in place, then you're going to start seeing them flying over Abu Dhabi. That's when we will be then trialing the routes, for example, that they will be flying, their approaches, the social acceptability of these vehicles now suddenly being thrust upon the city of Abu Dhabi.
So, Daniel, Gary mentioned vertiports. I guess this is where you come in. So in terms of the infrastructure, is it similar? You're working on trials to make sure. And when we talk infrastructure, what do you mean? What is the infrastructure that's required?
Yes, infrastructure has quite a lot of meetings. There's quite a lot of different typologies that we can look at. So I think for skyports, each company has their own different approach, and also working with government, they might have a different direction that they want to take. But Skyports has already built a number of test beds globally. So one in Singapore, we have testing in Japan, in the US, and also the UK. We've recently built an asset there, which we're testing. So we're fully ready to sort of come in and know what is a decent size for a vertiport, depending on the number of passengers, etc. However, I think in the early days, I think it's important to get the most out of existing assets. Now, one struggle that we do have, whatever city it may be, is that some of the existing heliports, shall we say, are not in locations which are preferable for passengers. Not all, but there are going to be a few that are well located, and we should utilize those. The challenge there is to get them electrified, which is not the cheapest thing to do. But we would look at a small terminal to facilitate these passengers, and maybe we can get into some of our technology integration. But we do need to work very closely with all the OEMs. Skyports doesn't focus on one or two; it's all the industry. We want to be agnostic, and there's a number of key considerations when we're speaking to these OEMs, such as charging. Some different OEMs have different charging preferences, etc. So that doesn't help with being agnostic, or we have to put more money into the asset to make a number of vehicles to be facilitated to be charged. So there's that integration on the charging, but also on technology as well.
Can you give us an example or a sense of how big is the infrastructure required? I mean, when you talk about, for instance, a vertiport, what sort of size are we talking about? And generally, are they located with an airport, or actually for this to really work, they have to be scattered around a city?
Take a look at Dubai. It's very difficult to find land. Secondly, land is very expensive. And thirdly, we need to look at the constraints of the nature of Dubai itself in terms of the buildings. So it's very hard to find sites that are on ground. So we may need to elevate these sites. So we've done a lot of work on looking at what is the minimum footprint when it comes to buildings, when it comes to the actual terminal sites itself. But to answer your question, we could be looking at a terminal size around 200 square meters. So not very large. You could fit a number of modular terminals to maybe combine and facilitate that. And then the airfield itself, the minimum that we're looking at for a eVTOL is 17 by 17 meters for the landing area, albeit that you do need to take into consideration the takeoff and landing and approach.
Yeah.
So a number of different challenges there. But in the likes of, let's say, Abu Dhabi and Ras Al Khaimah, I think that you'll be able to look at on-ground facilities. I'm not going to say it'll be easier, but you don't have to elevate to a certain height, which takes time.
And then the size of the vehicles, because this is such an emerging technology, I think it's people don't really know how big all of this is yet. So what sort of size of vehicles, how many people will they take?
Most of the vehicles at this stage, and this is generally limited by technology at the moment, and the propulsion technology. Most of the vehicles are 4-seaters. You do get 2-seaters as well. Ehang, Chinese manufacturer, has a 2-seater pilotless one, but most are 4-seaters. It's a convenient configuration, and they tend to have a usable range within a city, so anything 30 to 50 kilometers, it becomes very efficient. When you go further than that, it becomes a little bit less efficient. So short hops, ideal. SkyDrive, for example, from Japan, they got a smaller vehicle. It's still a 4-seater, but it's optimized for no more than 15 kilometer sort of ranges, which is ideal in the Japanese environment when you consider their cities. It'll be short hops around the city. So there's a lot of different variations on this. And with this whole technology explosion that's happening with us, it's much like the 1930s were with conventional aviation, where there was this sudden explosion in technologies, and there were all kinds of new and different technologies that were implemented and designs that came out at that time. But however, it came back together here in about the 1940s, 50s, and you got what was now the conventional aeroplane. And the industry's in that sort of stage at the moment. So we're seeing some weird and wild ideas, which may or may not be very good. We don't know yet. And so there will be changes in this. Our long-term vision of this is that, yes, we will go up to maybe 10 to 16 seaters eventually, particularly on the regional and possibly international routes. That would more than likely be a hybrid type aircraft, behaving as a conventional aircraft in the cruise and an eVTOL for takeoff and landing. That's the sort of thing that you would use, for example, from Abu Dhabi to Ras Al Khaimah.
So it's more of an airport-to-airport vehicle rather than an airport to somewhere in the city.
It could be eVTOL. If you look at some of the configurations where they use electric for lift only, and that is battery powered for lift, and then once they get into the cruise, they park the electric blades, and a normal conventional petrol engine drives the propeller at the back, which pushes it forward, and it flies like a conventional airplane using its wings, recharging the batteries and when they come in to land, the battery's fully charged, electrics kick in again, they come in, they can land vertically. That's the beauty of this, is that you can access just about anywhere with it.
But that must mean, Daniel, that any number of vertiports, that infrastructure could become extremely widespread because, are we looking at a long-term future? Certainly not now, I understand, but are we looking at a long-term future where it is almost like a taxi, where you can be picking it up and being dropped off at many, many different places within a city, for instance? Because that must be a challenge in terms of them trying to get that design right.
Yeah, look, I think that is a long-term goal. I think at the start, obviously, we have regulators to appease. We have the public to appease as well. In terms of what we're trying to do, we want to build out the first few vertiports. you're right. There is a need to look into the future and see, the money that we're investing now, how much are we safeguarding for the future? And look, to be honest, similar to how heli operations exist today, there are heliports that can accommodate, AW139s, for example, and ones that can't. And I think that will be the case in the future. I do want to maybe just touch on another emerging infrastructure sort of asset within this realm, which is eVTOL ports. So
Yes.
eVTOL ports being short takeoff and landing, though not a major airport, but a short takeoff and landing strip. Because we are seeing a lot of OEMs sort of venturing into that space now, where instead of taking off, let's say vertically or on a steep incline, we see a lot of our partners looking at eVTOL ports now because it provides a bit of a wider range of offering, not only of aircraft, but what you can do at the facilities as well. However, when it comes to obviously cities that we're sitting in today, there is going to be a demand for vertiports, etc. But yeah, just to pick up what Gary was saying on the aircraft side of things, we are starting to see slightly more hybrids slash looking at additional passengers in the future. But to be honest, I think a lot of the OEMs are just trying to focus on getting certified. Yeah, that's what they should be focused.
And as you're saying, that at some point there'll be a shakeout in the vehicle types. It will emerge what is the best type. Because when people talk about eVTOLs, you sort of imagine this future of low-flying electric vehicles that could be landing in any number of places in a packed city like Abu Dhabi Island, or you look at something like the Marina, or here in DIFC, Singapore you mentioned. These are quite urbanized clusters, so it's hard to imagine that it could be anything other than maybe at the tops of buildings for landing. Is that fair?
So for me, I'm not a fan of putting it on the top of buildings just for the sake, if there's an existing helipad there, it needs to make sense. So for example, if you land there and it takes you 20 minutes to get to the ground floor, that's not going to be the best passenger journey. And our business case relies on people going through quickly. However, I do think that there is a need to look at the elevated side, which I've discussed already. The passenger journey is very critical to making anything elevated work. But secondly, if you wanted to recharge the vehicle on top of a skyscraper here, if there's a helipad there, who's going to pay the cost for bringing that cable all the way up to the top? Again, the electrification is quite expensive. So it's a careful balance. That's not to say that it can't become a verti-stop. So maybe not all assets need to have a charging. I think the issue that we are currently seeing is that aircraft will be limited in the early days. So while, their website may say we can fly X amounts of kilometers, I think in the early days it'll be somewhat restricted. And that means that a lot of the assets will need charging. But I do see a future where instead of it's a vertiport with chargers, a verti-stop can be maybe placed somewhere like here, for example, and then it hops off to Dhabi International Airport or wherever it may be.
Vertiports they come scalable size. So you can have a vertiport, for example, that has 3 landing pads and 12 parking areas. So you land, you move into the parking, shut down, offload passengers, upload passengers, go back, take off. It's just a place where you stop, switch off, get the passengers off as well. So you need to, when you look at a vertiport network, you need to look at the scalability all the way through. So what is the actual need? You have a need for base operation, for example, and that's where your maintenance would be, where your overnighting would be, where you would do your deep charge on the vehicles and things like that. So you need a better level of support for the vehicle at that, compared to something like, as he said, a verti-stop. It could be just a piece of concrete in the ground somewhere with a fence around it and a little terminal building there where you land passengers off through the terminal and out. The beauty of these type of operations is that you don't need big buildings. You don't want people sitting there waiting half an hour for an air taxi. You want them in and out and go. And so when you look at this whole ecosystem, it has to be a fully integrated type transport scenario. Daniel mentioned about coming down the lift. How long does it take to come down the lift? How long are you going to sit to get a taxi after you land? So it has to be all integrated. And that's our vision on this, is that you go into a particular application. I want to go from this point to that point. The application gives you a whole lot of various options at various price points. So you can go with a conventional taxi, which is going to cost you so much, and as your carbon footprint is going to be so much out of that. Or you can come down and then you can say, pick up a driverless taxi to the vertiport. You're going to fly from the vertiport with the eVTOL to another vertiport. You're going to get off there. There will be a driverless taxi waiting for you there to take you to your final destination. So this whole network is about the middle mile, the eVTOLs, but it has to connect into everything else around it. Otherwise, it just becomes another white elephant. It's good to get a picture on. So it needs to be usable, it needs to be accessible for people to use. And as Daniel said, one of the great challenges is to actually find locations. In a built-up city, where do you put these things? Ideally, you want them on the ground, ideally. However, you have the reality of having to put them on top of buildings is there. So then you might look at a network that's more verti-stop orientated, than with having larger terminals on the outside that then feed into that network. Or you need to be more creative in how you do your vertiports. Abu Dhabi is an island. It's got water all around it. What about on water or above water vertiports? Integrate that into a water taxi station next door. This is the sort of integration that we're now looking at and now trying to create within Abu Dhabi, that everything works together, that it's not a system on its own. It's all part of an integrated transport system. With that, you can then add in the cargo side. So these vehicles are very limited in what they can actually carry weight-wise. So you can't carry, for example, if you come in on your international flight, and you want to fly to your hotel on the eVTOL, which is quite possible, and it's a business model which is definitely considered as to be part of your air ticket coming in as a sweetener, that in association with your flight, you fly with the eVTOL to your hotel, your luggage comes with a cargo drone afterwards and comes and lands at the same vertiport and offloads your luggage. So it's all looking at how we can do everything together. And this is the complexity of it. The stage we're at the moment is, we're in the baby step stage. We're learning at the moment. As I tell the people around us, we're creating the future every day. No one's done this before. So our ideas and our methodologies that we're creating now are going to be the foundations for what this system is going to be in 20 to 30 to 50 years' time.
So you're expecting to make mistakes,
Oh, yes.
review,
You have to
learn
make
from
mistakes.
those.
Yes. It's inevitable. It's human nature. You make a decision on the best information available at that time. And it might be a very good decision that you make at that time, but the data that you're using to make that decision might not be relevant or valid. So you can expect that you will make mistakes. However, what you need to do then in the way that you approach it is that you create this environment of where you can adjust. So you think, especially at this stage of the technology, you've got to be very flexible in how you're doing something. So you can't come in and say, rigidly, we're going to do this, 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 and this. This is going to be it, fixed. That's it, that's the best. It's the best for now. Is it going to be the best in 10 years' time when your population has doubled and the majority of the population of Abu Dhabi lives off island? So you need to start looking at and being flexible in that way. So the way we're looking at it is that we're going to have a public vertiport network within Abu Dhabi, which will be operated by private operators on behalf of the Abu Dhabi government. However, we've left in the option of having a commercial vertiport. So that's in an area where it might not be viable to put in a public vertiport, and that would allow companies like Skyports or whatever to bid to create a vertiport in that area, particular area, to serve a particular purpose. Obviously, all the commercial ones would be subservient to the public ones. The public ones would get first priority, and the commercial one would have a lower priority. But this is the way you've got to try and create some flexibility. It's not one size fits all. It's definitely not that at the moment. It's a case of letting it grow organically and then getting the best results in the end. Being too prescriptive means that you're not going to get what is needed in the end.
And if you're working with commercial operations and you're working with the cargo operations, I'm guessing you're looking at putting infrastructure in areas where there is lots of warehousing facilities, because otherwise it would be just too difficult to transport. And also then they've got to look at that last mile again, haven't they, between delivering and at both ends of the journey.
Yeah, exactly. I think the passenger vertiport concept has been focused on a bit more than the cargo side. With that said, Skyports does have a drone services business as well. So we are effectively a drone airline for a lot of our partners. So we have looked at drone vertiports before. Very different to passenger vertiports in some ways, obviously with regard to the handling of cargo and whatnot, and also where they're placed. But we have been looking into that, not so much locally here, but more internationally. And yeah, there's obviously a few OEMs are looking at cargo operations as a way into international regions for certification and approval, essentially. So we have been looking into that, but the focus has been somewhat more on passenger. In the early days, there's going to be a supply constraint, right? So as a vertiport developer, how do we make money in a world where there's only a few aircraft per region or per market, right? It's not easy to build that business case. So I do see a world in which an asset can be used not only for a hybrid, let's say for eVTOL helicopters, but potentially for passenger and cargo, right? So, for example, it could be passenger during the day and maybe cargo at night as well. Like, you really need to try and get as much out of this asset to build that business case, because in the longer term, great, there'll be hundreds of aircraft and whatnot, but in the early days, we're speaking about a handful.
Yeah.
So trying to build a business case in the early days is heavy, but in the longer term, we can make it work.
Yeah, and it's exactly what he's saying there. You got this asset, this vertiport asset. It's going to be peak time in the morning, in the rush hour. Say peak time, we're going to be very limited with vehicles in the beginning, and then in the evening, maybe at night a little bit. But the rest of the time, it's standing empty. What better way to get these little trucks off the road that are causing congestion and pollution and all these type of things, and you can bring it in with a cargo drone, and you're utilizing this facility 24 hours a day, where you can start getting stuff in. 2:00 in the morning, you have these arriving on these cargo drones are driving bringing pallets, and Abu Dhabi already has a driverless cargo delivery trial on the go at the moment. And if you can have this whole system automated with little robotic forklifts that take the pallet off, move it onto these vehicles, driverless vehicles that can deliver them to the client in the midnight hours. So when they're open for business the next day, they're fully stocked. They've got their deliveries already in place for the day. That is the sort of vision for it. As soon as an asset sits doing nothing, it's not making money, it's losing money. You need to keep them active.
So let's look a little bit at the regulation, the safety, how you're working with government, because that's obviously a key concern. Any new transport is going to bring question marks around, is it safe? Are we heading for a future where our skies are full of multiple vehicles, and therefore, how do you make sure that that's safe? How are people safe on the ground, etc.? So what's the work that's being done there? To both of you, I'll ask that.
Well, I can start off from the air side. Effectively, an eVTOL is a slow electric helicopter. And when you start to look at it in that context, because that's how it flies, it flies like a slow electric helicopter.
At about the same height as it?
Yes, they're up to about 1,500 foot, depending on, if they want to get more range and things like that. Obviously lower for shorter hops and things like that. It doesn't make sense to go too high. So they piloted. It's a conventional aeroplane. When you look at it framed in that way, it's operated as a conventional aeroplane. And so it's treated as a conventional aeroplane within the air traffic management system. So it will have to have transponders on board, communication for the pilots, all of that has to be in place. And it gets, yes. And so they will need to file flight plans, etc., just like any other aircraft would. However, we're also looking at what's called a unmanned aircraft traffic management system, a UTM, which is lower. That's 400 foot and below. So this is typically where you'll find most of your small drones would be in that type of area. Now, the way that we are approaching this is that this is a first step, the UTM. It's a new need. It's maybe 10 years old, this need to be able to control these drones in that sort of area. However, we do foresee that this is going to grow. At the moment, it's limited to 400 foot. When you start to talk then about the urban air mobility environment over a city, that bubble goes up to about 4,000 foot, 5,000 foot over the city. So the idea is that this UTM will then grow into an urban air mobility type transport management system. And then with all of these things, they have to be integrated into the ATM system. It has to. There's no getting away from that. It has to be. However, this project as well is also part of a technology growth at the moment. It's allowing us to validate future technologies for air traffic management. And so the idea is that a lot of these technologies will then grow into the ATM environment. And so eventually in the end, you'll have a universal traffic management system, which does not only over the city and in the city, but also low level, high level, inter-regional type operations. And that's the way that we see it. There's a lot of advantages for eVTOLs. They are quiet. They are incredibly quiet. And so you don't have the restrictions of, for example, helicopters, which are noisy. They are noisy. So you'll be able to operate them in a much closer proximity to noise-sensitive areas. And it's an advantage we haven't yet been able to tap into. And that will come. As the systems develop, that will come. As for the certification issue, yes, regulators are very conservative in how they certify systems. And quite rightly, that's why we have got such good safety records in aviation at the moment, is because of the conservative nature that the regulators have held over the last 100 years. However, again, we do expect that this is going to evolve as well, because it's not just what it was previously. Everything's moving. So it needs to evolve with the need. We need to, for example, start to bring in AI tools for the regulators to be able to not only number crunch and get through the data and to be able to certify a vehicle quicker from an engineering sense. We also need to you start using these tools for monitoring, for trend analysis, for picking up red flags, to be able to allow you to do interventions and things like that. So there is going to be a change as well within regulators. Normally regulators change very slowly, but we're seeing that the regulators, particularly in the UAE, have been very, very open-minded in how they've approached these systems. And because of it, we're progressing very quickly.
Well, it's it's something that the government really wants to achieve, isn't it?
Yes, and the GCA has been very good, very, very good in how they've approached this issue.
Okay, so from your side,
moving quite fortunately with the GCA releasing the first of its kind ready port regs globally, right? I found the GCA to be very responsive, but also they want to hear feedback as well on what they send out to industry for comment. I think just to comment on the aircrafts themselves, like these aircrafts will be certified to an extremely high standard. Right, some of them similar to a Boeing 737 and August.
because any failure, particularly a failure that ends in injury, it could potentially end the whole industry.
For sure.
Yeah, exactly. And it won't be good news for us as the vertiport providers as well, right? Maybe we could fall back to helicopters, but then again, to Gary's point, some of these vertiports are placed in urban environments where potentially you don't have the luxury of accommodating helicopters. So, there's a tremendous amount of redundancy built into these eVTOL as well to appease regulators. And I also think the regulators will be putting additional restrictions on in the early days in terms of safety to make sure that, things are progressing well. So I think it'll be a few years before we see the full spec of these aircraft sort of being unleashed in certain markets, depending on sort of how the first year or so goes. But as Gary said, the regulators move quite quickly here, and that's why Skyports is here and invested quite a bit of money to date, and hopefully a bit more in the future. So yeah, regulators have been fantastic here in the UAE.
Okay, so let's end by looking at the future. So I'll start with you, Daniel, and then move to you, Gary. In terms of getting your forecast, your predictions, when do you think we're going to see the next phases of development, where it starts to become more common, and how long are we away from what you would consider to be full commercialization of this industry?
So I'll start off with the prediction. Look, Skyports has some grand aspirations as it is, and to be honest, I think we're the first company to go and deliver ready ports and expand a lot of money into ready ports, whether it's the test beds, so we've built a lot of those, or whether it's in the Emirates, where we're currently investing a tremendous amount of money. So I think the future will be, in terms of a global sense, the future will be the UAE over the next few years. There won't be another country, I don't think, that will have, let's say half a dozen or a dozen ready ports over the next 2 years. It'll be the UAE. So I think the UAE will be considered the future. But I do think other countries will quickly adopt, especially when OEMs are reaching full production. So that brings me on to your sort of second point around whenever you reach a point of sort of full commercialization. I'd like to think that's when most of our vertiports are let's say somewhat utilized, or doesn't need to be 100%, but 50 to 70%, where we have traffic. But also to get to that point, we need OEMs to be mass producing their vehicles as well. So we're some time away from that. And I think to put a number of years on it, I think it will be, I think we'll see excellent progress in the next 2 years, but I think it's 3 years away from full on mass production of vehicles where we see dozens and dozens of aircraft flying around. Somewhere like the UAE may achieve more than that, just given the attraction to the Emirates. But yeah, I think we're a few years out before I sort of see a full ramp up of that full commercialization, mainly due to supply.
Yeah, I would tend to agree completely with Daniel with that. Our first hurdle at this stage is certification of the vehicles. Second hurdle is mass production. And then third hurdle is technology development. Yes, everything is running on batteries at this stage. There's a limit on these battery technology. Yes, we are expecting a increase in battery performance in the very near future. The projects for hydrogen fuel cells to provide electricity on board the vehicle to extend range are all ongoing. All the OEMs are working on the side on that technology. But the time is also ripe for a technology disruptor to come in now in this energy supply field. So it is the chances of us getting a new technology, unforeseen technology, that can be able to be the source of energy on board these vehicles is quite good. I would love it to have something like a miniature fusion reactor to be able to get that sort of capability. But I think I'm a little bit optimistic in that sort of environment. But that's a sort of technology disruptor which could quite easily suddenly appear on the horizon. So yes, we are looking at then the future, piloted or non-piloted. That's a complete different argument that's coming in. How socially acceptable is an unpiloted vehicle? How many people would get on a helicopter without a pilot at
Do you
this
think
stage?
that we have to become used to autonomous ground-based vehicles before we'll accept
Yes.
autonomous
Yes.
flying vehicles?
It's definitely, and that's part of the plan. Abu Dhabi's had for a long time a program running on driverless taxis on Yas Island. We now have the driverless trams, driverless trains, driverless water taxis are coming. What's the next step?
So how many years then do you think you go through these pilots? Well, they are pilots at the moment because they have pilots. How many years until we reach the point where, we have enough vehicles that you could sit back and say, now we've reached commercial scale, prices are beginning to come down because there's competition?
Yeah, I would say, and again, this is my opinion, my guess at this stage, we would be looking at 15 to 30 years. Again, it depends on all of those factors. It could happen that all of a sudden that there's a sudden surge in the need for it, for whatever reason. It's a hard one. It's like, how long is that piece of string, type of thing. And a lot of this is wait and see, and then let it organically grow. As I mentioned earlier, you can want something, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can achieve that. You got to see how it works out in the end.
And equally, there could be a technology switch flick that actually suddenly accelerates that growth.
For sure. There might be a completely new configuration of airplane that'll come out, which will solve a lot of the problems of an eVTOL. Who knows? We're waiting for the younger generation to enter this market and take us into the future.
Very last one, I was just thinking while both of you were discussing, it could be a case where in 5 to 10 years, it's similar to cars where we don't differentiate as much between eVTOL and helicopter.
Yeah.
It's just another flying aircraft, which will be, in terms of vertiports, we want to accommodate aircraft, whether it's helicopters or eVTOLs. It'd be very interesting to see how that's evolve. Whether it's similar to your point around cars, and if it would just sort of follow sort of lag the car industry in terms of take up and whatnot. But yeah, it'd be very interesting to go out and see.
Okay, Daniel, Gary, thank you so much for your time. And we're looking at a future where I think the word uncertain is a little bit unfair. It's one of the most amazing transformations potentially of transportation, both cargo and for people, that we're seeing on the horizon. And how long it takes, well, who knows? But we see that next year the trials start for passenger transportation, and after that, who knows how long it will take. But it's certainly a really interesting change in the way that technology and transport is evolving. This has been a Future Energy Insights podcast for the World Future Energy Summit.